My name is Marina Alves. I'm 33 years old, a software engineer in Sao Paulo, and for as long as I can remember, my place in the family has been somewhere along the edges. I was the one behind the camera, the one asked to run errands, the one whose name never made it into the speeches. If you're watching this, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from. Sharing your own stories helps remind people like me that we're not alone, and your support truly means more than you know. I wish I could say I was surprised when the message arrived, but the truth is, part of me had been bracing for it. Still, seeing it in writing felt like a blade slipping between my ribs. It was a Tuesday evening when my phone buzzed with a notification from the wedding group chat. The planner had just shared the rundown for the ceremony. Timing cues, music selections, the toast. I opened it absent-mindedly, expecting to skim over details, but then I read the line that made my stomach clench. Brinde intimo no deke. Parents, best man, and those closest to the couple. I blinked, waiting for my name to appear further down. It didn't. My brother, Lucas, replied with a heart emoji. My mother chimed in a few minutes later, gushing about how perfect it all sounded. And me? I stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard, frozen. What was I supposed to type? Did you forget me? The words felt childish, but the ache in my chest was anything but. Memories began to crowd in. Not accidents, but patterns. The time they arrived late to my college graduation and missed me crossing the stage, but still posed for endless photos with Lucas in his medical school coat. The Christmas where I was told to take the picture so everyone can be in it, which, of course, meant everyone except me. Small cuts, repeated so often they became scars. Now, here it was again. Another milestone, another chance to be erased. I put the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, São Paulo hummed in its usual rhythm, the hiss of buses, the glimmer of headlights on wet pavement, rain tapping against the glass. Inside, my apartment felt hollow. I pictured the wedding day, the deck lit with golden bulbs, the pianist pressing soft chords, my parents standing proudly beside my brother as glasses were raised. A perfect portrait of family. And me? Another shadow at the edge, holding my silence. Something broke in me then. Not with anger, but with clarity. If they wouldn't give me a place in the frame, I would build one myself. If the glass wasn't raised to me, then I would raise one somewhere else. I didn't yet know how. But I knew this much. I was done waiting to be chosen. Growing up in my family was like learning a language where every word carried two meanings. The one you heard, and the one you were never meant to question. Next time usually meant never. We forgot meant we didn't think you mattered enough to remember. For years, I convinced myself these were harmless slips, but deep down, I knew they were choices. The pattern was everywhere. Subtle at first, then undeniable. I remember my 16th birthday. My friends gathered after school, waiting to be picked up for the small dinner I'd planned. I stood outside the building as the minutes ticked by, calling home again and again, only to get no answer. By the time my father finally pulled up, his excuse was quick. We were busy setting up for Lucas's sports banquet. I smiled tightly, pretending it was fine, but something inside me crumbled. That night, my cake was an afterthought, squeezed between speeches about my brother's latest trophy. Holidays followed the same script. On Christmas morning, my pile of gifts was always small, wrapped hastily, practical. A pair of socks, gloves, a plain notebook. Lucas's side of the tree, on the other hand, was stacked with shiny boxes, gadgets that beeped and blinked, things that drew admiration from everyone in the room. When I asked once why my gifts were so simple, my mother said, "You're practical, Marina. We give you what suits you." I carried those words like a brand. Practical, not cherished. Even family photos told the story. I can still see it. One Christmas, I wore a green dress my grandmother had sewn just for me. I stood proudly beside my father, waiting for the photographer's cue. At the last second, my mother slipped between us, nudging me out of frame so the three of them could have a picture together. I smiled anyway, my body half turned away, the sting buried under a mask of compliance. When I left for college, I thought distance would soften the edges. Maybe without daily comparisons, my parents would see me differently. But the silences followed me. Parents' weekend came and went. They skipped it to attend one of Lucas's local soccer games. When I invited them to see my first apartment, they said the drive was too far, then posted photos from a spontaneous trip to the coast with my brother and his girlfriend. Each time, I rationalized. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they didn't realize how much it hurt. But even when I excelled, even when I built something undeniable, the recognition never came. When I landed my first job, I called to share the news, my voice bubbling with excitement. My father's response was flat. "That's good. Now you can help Lucas with his expenses." My achievement became another footnote to his story. And the worst part wasn't the exclusion itself. It was how easily the rest of the family looked away. My aunts sent me sympathetic glances. My cousins asked casually if I'd be at events they knew I hadn't been invited to, but no one ever spoke up. It wasn't their place, I suppose. Or maybe it was easier to accept the version of family my parents curated than to question it. Over time, I learned to stop asking, stop expecting. I played my role, the supportive sister, the quiet daughter, the one who never needed much. But the ache never left. Every event, every dinner, every holiday carried the same undertone. I was present, but not included. I existed in the margins, tolerated, but never embraced. That's why the message about the wedding toast cut so deep. It wasn't new. It was the same story, written again, only louder. Only this time, something inside me refused to fold. I couldn't accept being erased one more time. If they wouldn't give me a place, I would carve one for myself. For years, I thought silence was survival. But now I was beginning to see it for what it truly was. Surrender. And I was done surrendering. The night after reading that message, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my phone still glowing faintly on the nightstand. The words replayed over and over in my head. Parents, best man, and those closest to the couple. As if I had never existed, as if decades of trying to show up, to belong, counted for nothing. It wasn't just about being left out of a toast, it was about the pattern that toast represented, a lifetime of being erased while my family smiled politely as though nothing was wrong. For hours, I rehearsed imaginary responses. I thought about messaging my brother directly, asking him why. I imagined calling my mother, demanding to know why she kept me outside the circle. Each time, the conversation ended the same way. With me small, unheard, accused of being dramatic. I knew that script too well, and for the first time in my life, I didn't want to play it again. Instead, another thought began to take shape. Quiet at first, then sharper, louder. If they won't give me a place in the picture, I'll create one of my own. The idea both terrified and thrilled me. What would it look like to stop begging for a seat and instead build a table? What would it mean to stop chasing scraps of recognition and instead offer something bigger, brighter, unforgettable? I sat up in bed, adrenaline buzzing under my skin. The wedding wasn't just an event anymore. It was an opportunity. My brother's perfect day had been orchestrated to highlight everything I wasn't, everything I'd been told I couldn't be. But perfection is fragile. It only takes a crack for people to see the truth. And I had the means to make that crack. I opened my laptop and pulled up the hotel's website. My eyes lingered not on the ballroom or the deck, but on the terrace, the rooftop space with its open sky, its panoramic view of the city. I imagined it lit with string lights, music drifting into the night, glasses raised in laughter not scripted, but real. A celebration within the celebration. A second stage where I didn't have to wait for permission. I knew it had to be subtle, not an open rebellion. That would only feed my parents' narrative that I was jealous, petty, trying to ruin things. Number. It had to be quiet, almost invisible, until it wasn't. An afterthought that became the memory people carried home. The more I pictured it, the clearer it became. A playlist split into 3 movements. The prelude, gentle and inviting. The middle, warm and alive. The final song, one that could hold a toast of its own. A photographer who specialized in candid shots, the kind that capture the exact moment someone forgets to pose and simply is. A bar serving drinks that felt celebratory without being ostentatious. Small touches, but together, enough to shift the gravity of the night. This wasn't about stealing the spotlight. It was about building my own. By the time the first streaks of dawn filtered through my curtains, the fear had settled into something steadier. Resolve. I wasn't going to confront them in words they'd twist or deny. I was going to show them in the only language they seemed to understand: presence. I closed my eyes one last time before sleep claimed me, and the image came so vividly I almost believed it had already happened. A terrace alive with music, people laughing freely, glasses clinking under the stars, and me, not watching from the edge but standing in the center, finally holding the glass they had always kept from my hand. That was the spark. And once it lit, I knew there was no turning back. Once the idea had taken root, it refused to let go. For years, I had trained myself to shrink, to accept silence as survival. But now, silence felt like surrender, and I was done surrendering. If my parents and family insisted on erasing me from their version of the wedding, then I would craft my own version, brick by brick, detail by detail. The first step was simple enough: securing the terrace. I called the hotel under the pretense of hosting a small private gathering for close friends. My voice was steady, professional, the way I spoke to clients when negotiating contracts. The manager hesitated at first. The terrace was usually reserved for corporate events, not personal celebrations. But when I agreed to cover the premium rate and signed the paperwork within hours, the space was mine. Just like that, a blank stage waited above their carefully curated ceremony. Next came the music. I knew I didn't want a traditional band or a playlist borrowed from wedding cliches. I wanted layers, something that could build mood, shift energy, and carry meaning without words. I called an old friend, a DJ who owed me more than one favor from the early days of his career when I'd helped him design his first booking app. No need for discounts, I told him. Just bring your best. We created 3 playlists: Prelude for Arrivals, light piano layered with soft beats, enough to melt the tension out of shoulders; Pulse for the heart of the night, a steady groove that invited people to dance, to laugh, to belong; and finally, Brinda, one perfect song that could cradle a glass in the air without a single speech rehearsed. The bar came next. I didn't want extravagance. Champagne towers would have felt like mockery. Instead, I designed a menu of understated but thoughtful drinks: gin with rosemary sprigs, sparkling water with slices of blood orange, mulled wine in small copper mugs, drinks that tasted like celebration without screaming for attention. A rented bar cart from the restaurant on the 23rd floor sealed the plan, but the details couldn't stop there. If I wanted this to work, it had to feel like more than an after-party. It had to feel intentional, memorable, inevitable. I reached out to a photographer whose work I adored, not the glossy posed images my parents loved, but the kind that captured in-between moments: a cousin mid-laugh, an aunt wiping away tears of joy, hands brushing together across a table. Candid truths, the ones no stage-managed wedding ever fully captured. And then there were the invitations. They couldn't be obvious. If word leaked too soon, my parents would twist it into another story about me trying to ruin Lucas's day. So I spoke to each person individually: cousins, aunts, even a few friends of the groom who had always made me feel welcome. I kept my voice casual, playful almost, as if this were just a spontaneous idea. Hey, after the toast, if you're tired of standing around, I've got something upstairs. Nothing big, just good music, a drink, a view worth seeing. Their responses were immediate, almost relieved. Some laughed and said, "Finally, something fun." Others whispered, "I'll be there, don't worry." Each yes was another thread pulling people toward me. To keep it discreet, I created fabric wristbands that looked like simple accessories. No logos, no bold colors, just thin strips of navy and gold. A quiet signal at the elevator doors, nothing more. Guests could wear them as bracelets or tuck them into pockets, unnoticed by anyone not paying close attention. By the end of the week, My plan was alive on paper, humming with possibility. I had the terrace, the music, the drinks, the photographer, and the people who would breathe life into it. All that remained was timing, a dance of entrances and exits, of moving people without drawing too much attention. And in that careful orchestration, I felt a strange kind of peace. For once, I wasn't waiting to be given a role. I was writing it myself. I could see it already, the terrace strung with lights, laughter echoing off the city skyline, glasses raised not because someone told them to, but because they wanted to. This wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It wasn't about tearing down the wedding my parents had orchestrated. It was about proving that joy didn't need their permission, that belonging could be built, chosen, claimed. For the first time in years, I went to bed with anticipation instead of dread. I had a plan. I had a stage. And this time, when the moment came, I would no longer be standing at the edges. A plan, no matter how carefully designed, is only as strong as the people who choose to step into it. For a long time, I thought I was the only one who felt like a shadow in my own family. But as I began to reach out, quietly, person by person, I discovered something unexpected. I wasn't alone. The first call I made was to my cousin Daniela. She and I had grown up together, but somewhere along the way, our paths diverged. She was bubbly where I was reserved, quick with jokes while I lingered in thought. And yet, I remembered all the times she had whispered to me at family gatherings, "Don't let them get to you," when my mother's words cut too sharp or my father's silence weighed too heavy. When I told her about the terrace, she didn't hesitate. "Marina," she said, her voice breaking into a laugh, "do you know how long I've been waiting for someone to shake things up?" "I'll be there. And I'll bring Paolo too. He's sick of playing audience at Lucas's performances." Relief washed through me like warmth in my chest. It was my first yes, and it felt like oxygen. Next came Aunt Clara. She had always been kind, the type to send birthday cards even when no one else remembered. Her husband, my uncle by marriage, had a way of making me feel like my presence mattered, even in small ways. I kept my voice light when I invited them, framing it as something casual upstairs. There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a sigh. "You know," she said softly, "your parents never realized how much they left you out. James and I will come. We'd much rather be with you than sit through another staged toast." Every yes chipped away at the years of silence I'd carried. It wasn't just about filling the terrace. It was about realizing that others, too, had felt the weight of my parents' narrow version of family. Even my younger cousin Raphael, barely 20, jumped at the invitation. "Honestly?" he confessed, lowering his voice though we weren't in the same room. "I can't stand how fake it all feels." Everyone smiles, but no one's really happy down there. If you've got something real going on, I want to be part of it. The momentum grew quickly. Each conversation lit a spark that spread, slow but steady, across the family web. Some people I didn't even need to convince. They volunteered, almost relieved that someone had finally drawn a line. Others were cautious, asking questions like, "Will your parents be upset if they find out?" I kept my tone even. This isn't about them. It's about us. It's about having a place where we're not just background. That answer seemed to be enough. Still, I was careful. I didn't send messages in group chats or write anything down that could be screenshotted and passed along. I spoke voice to voice, one at a time, trusting only the people who had already shown me small kindnesses over the years. The secrecy wasn't paranoia. It was survival. If my parents found out too soon, they'd twist it into proof of my supposed bitterness. But if they found out at the right moment, their silence at the half-empty toast would speak louder than any accusation. One evening, after a long day at work, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad in front of me. I scribbled names of those who had said yes, Daniela and Paolo, Aunt Clara and James, Raphael, a few friends from outside the family who knew the weight of exclusion all too well. Each name was a reminder. I wasn't staging this for revenge alone. I was building a space for all of us who had lived too long in the shadows. For years, my parents had been the gravitational center of family gatherings. Everything orbited their house, their rules, their approval. But as my list grew, I felt that gravity shift. Not violently, not with fanfare, but with quiet certainty. The center was moving, toward me, toward us, toward the terrace that would glow above their stage-managed wedding. The knowledge filled me with a strange mix of emotions. Pride, yes, but also grief. Because buried in each yes was a truth I hadn't wanted to face. I wasn't the only one they had diminished. My parents' vision of family had always been selective, conditional, transactional. They didn't just forget me. They overlooked anyone who didn't fit the roles they'd chosen. Realizing that hurt, but it also clarified everything. This wasn't just my fight, it was ours. By the end of that week, the plan no longer felt like a fragile secret. It felt like momentum. The terrace wasn't just mine anymore. It was a gathering point, a quiet rebellion, a chance for connection that had been denied to too many for too long. And for the first time, I understood something crucial. Family isn't defined by who holds the microphone, but by who chooses to show up when given the choice. 2 nights before the wedding, I was scrolling absent-mindedly through social media when the video appeared. My brother Lucas had posted a story. 30 seconds of laughter, clinking glasses, and the glow of rehearsal lights bouncing off polished wood. The caption read, "Run through for the big toast." Couldn't ask for better people by my side. I tapped the screen, letting it play again, and this time I studied every frame. My parents stood proudly on either side of him, champagne flutes raised. His fiancée smiled in the center, her maid of honor leaning close. The best man threw an arm around Lucas's shoulder, tilting his glass toward the camera. Everyone was there. Everyone but me. The sound of their laughter, hollow through the phone speaker, echoed in my small apartment. It wasn't just the image that stung. It was the ease of it. The casual way they toasted as if the circle were complete, as if no one were missing. I set my phone down, but the image clung to me like smoke. My chest tightened, and suddenly I was 16 again, standing on the curb with a paper crown on my head, waiting for parents who were too busy celebrating Lucas's victory to remember my birthday. I was 22 again, showing them my diploma while their eyes slid past me toward his new white coat. I was 27, watching them beam in a family portrait while I held the camera, excluded from the frame. The past rose up in sharp clarity, each memory another shard pressing deeper. The rehearsal toast wasn't new, it was just another repetition of a script I had known all my life. But this time, I refused to be the silent understudy. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared out the window into the humid São Paulo night. Neon signs flickered against the dark sky, buses hissed along wet streets, and people moved below me, each caught up in their own stories. Somewhere downtown, couples were toasting anniversaries, friends were raising glasses in noisy bars, and strangers were celebrating small victories no one else would ever record. And here I was, erased from my own family's story, yet again. For a moment, grief threatened to drown me. My throat burned, my hands trembled against the glass, and I wanted nothing more than to collapse into the same silence I had known for decades. But beneath the grief, something harder pulsed. Defiance. The terrace plan was no longer just an idea, it had become necessity. Seeing them rehearse their version of family, their perfect tableau, clarified everything. They weren't going to notice me unless I forced them to. They weren't going to make space unless I carved it myself. That night, I pulled the terrace folder back onto my desk. I checked the playlists, refined the drink menu, confirmed the photographer's arrival time. I emailed the hotel manager to double-check the lighting setup and the spare heaters in case the night turned chilly. Every detail mattered, not just because I wanted it perfect, but because perfection was their weapon. For once, I would wield it too. Not as a mask to erase, but as a stage to include. The next day, Daniela texted me. Saw Lucas's story. Don't let it get to you. We'll make our own toast. Her words pierced the fog, and I felt my shoulders unclench. I wasn't the only one who had seen the exclusion. I wasn't the only one who understood. That reassurance became a lifeline. Aunt Clara called later that evening, her voice gentle. Don't waste energy mourning what they'll never give you. Save it for what you're building. That's where the real family will be. I clung to those words, because the truth was, the rehearsal toast had cut deeper than almost anything before. It wasn't just the exclusion. It was the joy on their faces, the conviction that the picture was complete without me. But maybe that was what I needed. Proof that I wasn't imagining it. Evidence that my absence had been deliberate, chosen, celebrated. When I went to bed that night, the video still looped in my mind, but it no longer left me hollow. It left me resolved. The terrace wasn't just my rebellion. It was my reply. And when the night came, it wouldn't be their toast people remembered. It would be mine. The morning of the wedding broke hot and bright, the kind of Brazilian sun that pressed itself against every window pane and made the air shimmer above the streets. I woke before my alarm, nerves and anticipation sparking through me in uneven waves. My dress hung on the back of the door, understated navy silk, elegant without trying to compete. I had chosen it deliberately. I wouldn't be the spectacle, but I also wouldn't be invisible. As I got ready, I watched the city moving outside my apartment window. Cars crawled through intersections, vendors shouted at corners, and somewhere in the distance, church bells rang. The ordinary rhythm of São Paulo felt almost mocking compared to what waited for me that afternoon. For most of my family, today was the pinnacle, the carefully polished production they had been planning for over a year. For me, it was the stage for something far more subtle, something they wouldn't see coming until it was already too late. By early afternoon, I hailed a cab and began the slow ride through congested streets toward the hotel. My heart thudded with each passing block, not from fear, but from the weight of everything converging at once. Years of exclusion, months of planning, and the delicate secrecy that had to hold for just a few more hours. The hotel loomed above the avenue, glass shimmering like water, its entrance already crowded with guests in bright dresses and dark suits. I paid the driver, smoothed the hem of my dress, and stepped into the stream of arrivals. Inside, the lobby was alive with chatter and the crisp sound of heels against marble. Staff bustled around, directing people to the elevators, offering flutes of champagne already sweating in the heat. I caught glimpses of familiar faces, cousins adjusting ties, aunts smoothing dresses, friends of Lucas posing for quick photos beneath the chandelier. Every smile seemed rehearsed, every laugh practiced, as if the whole building had been drafted into the performance. And then I saw them. My parents stood near the check-in desk, greeting guests as though they were royalty-receiving subjects. My mother's dress glittered under the lights, her arm looped possessively through my father's. They looked radiant, confident, untouchable. For a second, the weight of habit pressed against me, the urge to shrink, to apologize for existing in their spotlight. But I forced myself to keep walking, shoulders straight, eyes forward. Their gaze flicked toward me briefly, cool and dismissive, before shifting back to the crowd. No embrace, no smile, not even a polite acknowledgement. Just silence, as if I were another stranger passing through. The sting was sharp, but fleeting. Because this time, I had something they didn't know. A plan humming quietly above their heads. Upstairs, the ceremony room was already half full. The decor was immaculate. White roses along the aisle, candles flickering in tall glass columns, strings of lights woven delicately overhead. Guests murmured in admiration, snapping photos for social media, posting their hashtags and filters. It was beautiful, yes, but in the way a showroom is beautiful. Perfect, but cold. I slipped into a seat near the middle, not too close to the front where my absence in the toast would be obvious. Not too far back where I could be mistaken for an outsider. Around me, cousins smiled politely, some with knowing glances that lingered just long enough to reassure me they hadn't forgotten our whispered promises about the terrace. A wristband peeked out from beneath Daniela's clutch as she squeezed my hand in greeting. "Tonight," she whispered, her eyes alight with mischief. "Tonight will be different." The ceremony unfolded in perfect order. The music swelled, the bride floated down the aisle, Lucas grinned his golden boy smile that had been polished since childhood. Vows were exchanged, rings slipped onto fingers, applause erupted on cue. It was flawless, almost painfully so. I clapped, smiled, played my part, but inside, my thoughts were already climbing the floors above us, where string lights waited to be switched on, where glasses and music and real laughter were ready to replace this rehearsed pageantry. As the officiant declared them married and the crowd rose in celebration, I glanced once more at my parents. They were beaming, their faces alight with pride, as though the script had unfolded exactly as they had written it. And for now, it had. But scripts end, curtains fall. And when the light shifted later that night, the story would belong to me. The ballroom transformed as the ceremony ended, and the staff moved seamlessly into the reception. Tables glittered with gold chargers and polished glassware, candles flickered in tall columns, and a soft hum of string music filled the air. Waiters glided between guests, trays of champagne glasses balanced effortlessly in their hands. It was elegant, yes, but also suffocating, like a theater where every line and gesture had been rehearsed 1,000 times. I found myself at a round table tucked halfway toward the back. Daniela and Paolo sat with me, their smiles deliberately bright, their eyes carrying unspoken solidarity. Raphael dropped into the chair on my other side, leaning close enough to whisper, "Just wait. Our night is coming." His voice steadied me, though my heart pounded hard against my ribs. The clinking began, soft at first, then louder, the universal signal that the speeches were about to start. Glass against glass, echoing across the room until every head turned toward the front of the hall. Lucas stood there, radiant in his tailored suit, one arm looped proudly around his new wife. Beside them, my parents held their flutes high, their smiles wide and unshakable. The best man adjusted his tie, ready to speak. The maid of honor already dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. The circle was complete without me. My mother's voice rang out first, delicate but sharp, the kind that carried effortlessly to the farthest corners of the room. "We are so grateful to celebrate this moment with family," she said, her eyes shining as if tears might spill. "Lucas has always been the light of our lives, and tonight we welcome a daughter just as bright." Applause rippled across the tables, polite and enthusiastic. I forced a smile, my champagne glass untouched in front of me. My father spoke next, his words clipped, precise. "Family is everything. It's what sustains us, what defines us. Tonight proves that when we come together, nothing is missing." He emphasized the last phrase as though it were a verdict. My throat tightened, heat flooding my chest. Nothing is missing. The best man launched into a practiced story about late-night adventures, about loyalty and brotherhood. Laughter roared across the hall. The maid of honor followed with her own sentimental tale, painting the bride as flawless, saintly. Tears flowed, applause echoed again. And then came the final moment, the raising of glasses, the shimmering photograph of unity they had planned for months. Lucas lifted his flute high, his voice firm. "To family, to love, to everything that makes this night unforgettable." The room rose as one. Flutes lifted, candles reflected in crystal, applause thundered like waves crashing against stone. For a brief second, I stood too, my hand trembling as it reached toward the untouched glass before me. But something inside me froze. I couldn't lift it. Not this time. Because even as they declared the circle unbroken, I knew the truth. I wasn't in it. My absence wasn't oversight. It was design. I stayed seated as those around me clinked and sipped. My stillness was my rebellion, small and invisible to most, but monumental to me. Daniela's hand found mine under the table, squeezing hard. Her eyes glistened as she mouthed, "Almost there." The applause swelled again, the music rose, and the official toast ended. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling the transition to dinner. Waiters poured wine, trays of appetizers emerged, conversations restarted. The show went on. But something had shifted in me. Watching them bask in their self-declared completeness didn't break me. It confirmed me. The pain I felt wasn't weakness anymore. It was fuel. Every clink of crystal was another reminder that the terrace had to happen, that the night couldn't end here, inside this scripted perfection. I looked toward the tall windows lining the ballroom. Beyond them, the city pulsed with life. Above us, on the top floor, lights were already being strung across the terrace. Tables were waiting, music was cued, glasses stood ready to be raised in a different kind of toast, one that didn't require permission, one that didn't erase anyone. As Lucas leaned down to kiss his bride again, and laughter filled the room, I whispered to myself, almost like a promise. They think this was the toast, but the one they'll remember is still to come. The official toast had ended, but the echo of it lingered like smoke I couldn't clear from my lungs. Laughter rolled across the ballroom as waiters filled glasses and served plated meals, the scripted perfection marching forward as if nothing could interrupt it. To anyone watching, it was flawless. To me, it was suffocating. But I knew something they didn't. The real night hadn't even begun. As dinner unfolded, I leaned toward Daniela. 10 minutes, I whispered. She nodded once, subtle, her smile never breaking as she twirled pasta around her fork. Raphael caught my eye from across the table and tapped the slim navy band around his wrist in silent confirmation. The signal was alive. I let the room flow around me, conversations rising and falling like waves. My parents were near the head table, glowing with satisfaction, my father's hand steady on his glass, my mother beaming as if she were the one in the bridal gown. They believed the story was complete. They didn't notice the quiet exchanges, the nods, the soft footsteps beginning to weave a new rhythm beneath the music. The first to rise was Aunt Clara. She excused herself casually, claiming she needed a breath of fresh air. Her husband followed a minute later, stretching his legs, muttering something about the heat. No one questioned them. At weddings, people wander. The staff held the elevator doors politely as they stepped inside, navy bands tucked neatly under their sleeves. Next came Daniela and Paolo, slipping away with easy laughter, making it seem like a trip to the restroom. Raphael joined them seconds later, pretending to answer a call. Each departure was small enough to pass unnoticed, yet together they created a current pulling steadily upward. I remained seated, watching, waiting, my pulse quickening. Timing mattered. If too many left at once, suspicion might spark. But in measured beats, like music, it worked. Every 2 or 3 minutes, another guest stood, drifting toward the elevators, their absence swallowed by the noise of clinking cutlery and rising chatter. When my turn came, I pushed back my chair slowly. My glass was still half full, condensation sliding down its stem. I lifted it briefly to my lips, then set it back down untouched. One last performance of compliance. Then I rose. The ballroom lights glittered as I moved toward the edge of the crowd. My parents were laughing with Lucas, their heads tipped close, oblivious. The bride's family posed for photos by the floral arch. No one noticed me step through the doors. The elevator ride was brief but electric. When the doors slid open, the contrast stole my breath. The terrace was alive. String lights glowed above, casting golden warmth over the tables. The DJ's prelude playlist drifted softly through hidden speakers, piano layered with gentle beats, a rhythm that seemed to coax laughter from the air itself. Glasses clinked as Aunt Clara raised hers in greeting, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Raphael leaned against the railing, grinning at the city skyline that stretched endlessly below. "Marina," Daniela said, sweeping me into a hug the moment I stepped out. "You did this." I shook my head, but her grip only tightened. "No," she whispered. "We did this." The terrace filled quickly, but never chaotically. Each arrival carried with it a ripple of relief, as though everyone had been holding their breath downstairs and could finally exhale up here. The chatter was different, lighter, unforced. People spoke with animation instead of careful politeness. Laughter rang sharp and true, unmeasured by whether it fit the script. The photographer moved quietly among them, capturing smiles that weren't rehearsed, glances that weren't staged. He caught Raphael's unguarded grin, Aunt Clara's delighted tears, Daniela's hand resting warmly on Paolo's. Every click of the shutter preserved what my parents would never understand. This was family too, maybe even more than the one downstairs. I stood at the center, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the enormity of it. For the first time, I wasn't on the edge. I wasn't the forgotten guest or the extra chair no one remembered to set. I was here, among people who had chosen to be here with me. Below us, the ballroom throbbed with music and speeches. The story my parents believed was definitive. Up here, a new story was unfolding. One they hadn't written. One they couldn't control. I caught my reflection in the terrace's glass doors. Not the shadow I'd grown used to seeing, but someone steady, someone visible, someone no longer waiting for permission. The terrace wasn't full yet. Others would come, drifting upstairs once the official dances began and the speeches dragged on. But the spark was lit. The shift had begun. And as the city stretched out beneath us, glowing and infinite, I knew the night would end not with the toast they rehearsed, but with the one we were about to create. By the time the first notes of the terrace's second playlist began to swell, the space was full. The night air was warm but softened by a faint breeze, carrying the city's pulse up to where we stood. String lights glowed overhead, tiny constellations stitched into the dark. Glasses shimmered in golden light, laughter rose in unmeasured bursts, and the terrace buzzed with something the ballroom below could never manufacture: ease. I moved among the clusters of people, checking in, making sure no one felt like an outsider. But the truth was, I didn't need to. This gathering had its own rhythm now. Cousins leaning close in animated conversation, aunts swaying gently to the music, even a few of Lucas's friends laughing in corners as though they'd stumbled into a secret they hadn't known they were craving. Then, somewhere between songs, a hush began to ripple through the terrace. It wasn't forced. It wasn't cued by the clinking of glass. It was organic, a soft pull of attention toward the center where I stood. Daniela gave me a small nod, her eyes bright. Raphael tapped his glass gently, not to demand silence but to signal something different. An invitation. My pulse roared in my ears. For years I had dreamed of a moment like this, only to push it down, convinced it would never come. And now here it was. Alive. Undeniable. I lifted my glass, the stem trembling slightly between my fingers, and let the quiet settle. I wasn't supposed to give a toast tonight, I began. My voice carried more steadily than I expected. In fact, I wasn't supposed to be part of one at all. A few chuckles echoed, sympathetic, but I didn't pause. Downstairs, the family toast was perfect, scripted, complete. At least that's what they told themselves. But what I realized is this: perfection doesn't always tell the truth. Sometimes it hides it. Faces turned toward me, their features open, unguarded. I felt no judgment, only connection. For a long time I thought the problem was me. That if I worked harder, smiled more, stayed quieter, maybe I'd finally be let into the circle. But tonight, standing here, I see it clearly. The circle was never broken. It just wasn't where they thought it was. I lifted my glass higher, my hand steady now. It's here. With the people who chose to show up. With those who know that family isn't about rehearsed speeches or staged photographs. Family is about who stands beside you when no one else does. The silence deepened, not heavy, but electric. Aunt Clara's eyes shone with tears. Raphael grinned through the lump in his throat. Daniela squeezed Paolo's hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. I don't need to be invited to a toast to belong, I finished. Because this, right here, right now, is the only toast I'll ever need. For a breathless moment, no one moved. Then, as if some invisible thread snapped, the terrace erupted in applause and cheers. Glasses lifted, clinked together in a cascade of sound that rang out against the night sky. Some laughed, some cried, but every single one raised their drink toward me. The photographer's shutter clicked rapidly, capturing not a performance, but a truth. Me at the center, glass aloft, surrounded by faces that reflected back not pity, not obligation, but choice. As I lowered my glass and sipped, warmth flooded through me, not just from the wine, but from the realization that this was the moment I had been chasing all my life. Not validation from my parents, not approval from Lucas, just proof that I could create belonging without their permission. Below us, the ballroom music thumped on, the speeches likely continuing, the staged smiles frozen in glossy photos. But up here, the story had shifted. The real toast had been made, and it was one they couldn't erase, no matter how carefully they curated their version of family. I stood a little taller, the city lights reflected in the glass still warm in my hand. For once, I wasn't the afterthought, the shadow, the one asked to take the picture so everyone else could be in it. I was the picture. I was the moment. And it was mine. The terrace was still buzzing when my phone began to vibrate. At first, I ignored it. I didn't want anything to pierce the glow of the moment we had just created. But it wouldn't stop. A steady pulse against the table where I had left it. Finally, I glanced down. The screen lit up with a name I knew too well. Mother. I silenced the call, but seconds later another appeared. Father. Then another. Lucas. The pattern was unmistakable. Word had spread. Daniela leaned close, her voice low but certain. Don't answer. Not yet, I nodded, but my chest tightened. For so many years I had responded immediately, no matter how harsh the words on the other end. Ignoring them now felt like breaking an unspoken contract. But wasn't that the point? To finally refuse the script? The calls turned into messages. I opened them only long enough to see the preview. From my mother. What do you think you're doing? You've embarrassed us in front of everyone. From my father. This is childish. End it now. From Lucas. Marina, seriously? You've made your point. Stop before it gets worse. I locked the screen, slipped the phone into my clutch, and breathed. For the first time in my life, their anger didn't feel like a command. It felt like proof that I had shifted the ground beneath them. The music swelled again, people laughing, glasses refilling. Yet beneath it all, a tension hummed, invisible but sharp. Some guests glanced toward me with subtle questions in their eyes. Not disapproval, but curiosity. Will you answer them? Will you bend? I didn't. Minutes later, Raphael returned from the elevator, his expression tight. They know, he murmured. Your parents asked me where everyone had gone. They're furious. I swallowed, heat rising in my face, but my voice stayed calm. Let them be. They chose their version of family. We chose ours. Still, part of me braced for the moment the doors would open and they would storm onto the terrace, ready to drag the night back under their control. But the doors stayed closed. Perhaps they couldn't bear to see it with their own eyes, the circle complete without them. Instead, the messages grew longer, sharper. My mother's words poured in without punctuation, as though anger had broken her grammar apart. How dare you steal our night, you manipulated people, you've ruined everything, why can't you just be normal? I almost laughed at the irony. Normal to her meant silence. Normal meant me invisible at the edges. And that night, normal had finally shattered. Daniela caught my hand again, grounding me. Marina, look around. I did. The terrace glowed with faces alight, people laughing freely, the photographer catching another burst of joy. Aunt Clara was dancing slowly with her husband. Raphael joked with friends near the railing, and even strangers who had drifted up looked as though they'd stumbled into something real. Do you see them? Daniela whispered. That's family. Not those messages, her words steadied me. For years, I had measured my worth by the tone of my parents' voices, the approval in their eyes, the crumbs of acknowledgement they scattered. Tonight, I measured it by something else. Presence. And every presence here chose me. Still, I knew the fallout wouldn't end with ignored calls. My parents would carry this wound like a weapon, wielding it in every conversation, every gathering to come. They would paint me as the traitor, the manipulator, the one who fractured the holiday. But as the night deepened, I realized something they hadn't. You can't fracture what was never whole. When the music softened and the terrace settled into quieter clusters of conversation, I stepped away for a moment, slipping into the small office near the edge of the rooftop. My phone buzzed again. This time, I answered. My mother's voice exploded instantly, sharp and frantic. How could you do this to us? To your brother? You've humiliated the family. I waited until she ran out of breath before I spoke, my voice even. No. I invited people to spend time with me. They chose to come. That's all. My father cut in, his tone clipped. You've blown this out of proportion. Family doesn't keep score. I almost laughed again. That's all you've ever done. Every gift, every photograph, every invitation. You've kept score. And I was never on the winning side. Silence crackled across the line. Then my mother's voice, lower now, wounded but still hard. You don't understand what you've done. I do, I said. I built something without you. And it worked. Before they could answer, I ended the call. I stepped back onto the terrace, the music wrapping around me like a shield. The air was lighter now, not because the conflict was gone, but because I had faced it and survived. For once, their anger didn't feel like a storm I had to endure. It felt like the sound of a door closing. And on this side of the door, I was not alone. The morning after the wedding felt strangely quiet. The city was still awake below, traffic buzzing faintly through the streets. But the terrace, once alive with laughter and clinking glasses, now stood empty. Only the faint scent of wine and the last glow of string lights remained, as though the night itself had been folded away into memory. Inside the hotel, the rooms began to stir. Doors opened softly, cousins wheeling suitcases behind them, aunts chatting in hushed voices as they gathered scarves and jackets. The energy was slower now, warm but tired, the kind of calm that follows days of celebration. I moved through the halls like a host closing down a theater after the final performance, hugging Daniela at the elevator, clasping Raphael's hand, pressing my cheek against Aunt Clara's. Each goodbye carried the weight of something unspoken. This meant more than you know. Downstairs, I knew my parents were awake too. Perhaps still seething, perhaps already drafting their version of events, the story in which I had hijacked a wedding and betrayed my brother. But the truth no longer clawed at me. Because when I looked around the terrace, when I thought of the faces lit with golden light as they raised their glasses to me, I knew that the story they tried to write wasn't the only one that would endure. After the last shuttle departed, I lingered in the terrace alone. The city stretched wide, glittering under the pale light of morning. For years, I had believed that belonging was something given, something handed down by the people who claimed the word family. But yesterday proved otherwise. Belonging could be built, chosen, claimed. I thought about the messages still waiting on my phone. My mother's frantic words, my father's clipped anger, my brother's dismissive text. They would never see me the way I wanted them to. They would never rewrite the script to include me. And maybe that was finally okay. Because I had proof now. Proof that family wasn't about who shared your last name, but who chose to show up when you needed them most. Proof that even in the face of exclusion, you could write yourself into the story. The hotel staff arrived quietly to clear the terrace. Glasses were gathered, chairs stacked, lights dimmed. By afternoon, the space would be spotless, as though nothing had happened. But for those who had been here, the memory would linger, not as an afterthought, but as the moment the night truly came alive. I gathered my things slowly, savoring the silence. It didn't feel empty. It felt earned. On the ride home, I thought about the girl I had been. The one who sat quietly at family dinners, waiting for a smile, waiting for permission, waiting to be chosen. She felt far away now, like a ghost I could finally lay to rest. I wasn't naive. I knew there would be consequences. Cold stares at future gatherings, whispered accusations, endless retellings of their side of the story. But those consequences no longer held power over me. Because once you've stood in the center of your own circle, you can't be forced back to the edge. That night, back in my apartment, I placed the navy wristband on my desk. It was just a strip of fabric, nothing more. But to me, it was a symbol. Proof that, for one night, I had pulled people together not with obligation, but with choice. Proof that I didn't need their permission to belong. And as I sat there, the city lights flickering outside my window, I realized something else. This wasn't just about Christmases or weddings or birthdays. This was about every day that followed. From now on, I would stop asking for a seat at their table. I would build my own. If you've watched this far, I want to thank you. Stories like mine aren't easy to share, but they matter because they remind us that none of us are truly alone. So please, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to create your own table when the one you were given had no seat for you? Because if you have, then you already know. Sometimes the most powerful toast is the one you raise for yourself.